According to the National Institute of Health, parent advocacy is the single strongest predictor of how many services their children will receive if they have an intellectual or developmental disability. That reality becomes deeply personal for my friend Sean Adelman and his daughter Devon. Sean is an orthopedic surgeon, Air Force veteran, novelist, graphic novelist, author, who never expected that his life would be transformed by a diagnosis of Trisomy 21, which is more commonly known as Down syndrome. As the first person in his family to earn a professional degree, he believed years of medical education and military discipline had prepared him for almost anything. However, when his daughter Devon was born, during his first surgical residency, he quickly realized that neither medicine or life experience had quite prepared him to navigate the realities of raising a child with an intellectual disability. Growing up as a military child, Adelman had little exposure to individuals with intellectual or other disabilities, or the expectations that society places on people with Down syndrome. At the time, his understanding was painfully limited. What followed, my friends, was a journey of advocacy, uncertainty, growth, and ultimately transformation, not just for Devon, but her entire family. Today, my friends, Devon is a thriving, independent athlete, coach, employee, and adult who has made it her mission to become a tireless self-advocate. They're both on a mission to share how challenging assumptions, raising expectations, and embracing inclusion can radically reshape lives and communities. Their collective story simply is not about disability, but redefining success on their own terms, discovering resilience and understanding the perceptions can either limit or empower the boundaries of human potential and capacity to be societally included. This episode explores the emotional realities families face following a diagnosis, the importance of parental advocacy, the gaps which still exist in the healthcare and education systems, and while the power of storytelling has the potential and promise to change the understanding of cultural boundaries, understanding, and what is possible. And they joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McCann. Let's have this conversation. Sean, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to talk to you today about parenting, diversity, and inclusion. My friend, great to see you, and it's great to see you on this Monday, my friend. Thanks so very much for being here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, Sean, I know that you are one of the first in your family to earn a college degree, and I know that you spent some time in the military, but you tell me that raising a kid with a disability, there's no handbook or anything that can prepare you for that. So I'm wondering if we can start our conversation by you telling me about, what makes parenting so fabulous for you, and what you've really learned about the power of resilience through your journey raising Devon, and as a father yourself, my friend. What are your thoughts there?
I think being a parent in general really reframes your perspective. You grow up as a young person thinking life is one way and prioritizing your life and how you think things are going to be. And then when you have a child, your perspective changes as to what that is and what's important in life. When I was a young resident, as you said, I was the first doctor in my family, and I didn't know what to expect, and I had visions of research and Surgeon General and all these big picture things, which are important. But when you have a child, you sort of reframe your perspective on what's important. It doesn't mean you lose your goals; you just reframe it. And when you have a child, particularly with a disability, and I say the word disability lightly because we all know life is a spectrum and we all have strengths and weaknesses, and framing things on what we perceive as their disabilities, I think, can be a challenge. And that's one thing that I learned for sure, is reframing what we thought being a parent was and what meaning a productive life would be. And when you have a child with a disability, it forces you to look at what's important and what different strengths mean for different people. Because one of the challenges I had when we had Devon was all my education was based on health, and medicine. And they taught me very poorly what it meant to be in that situation. All you learned were the bad things, and not the good things. And so a lot of what I learned was to focus on things that were more important, and what possibilities were. And we can talk about that a lot, but really it's all about possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sean, I know that doing your research on me, you know that I have cerebral palsy. So we're having this conversation sort of on a mutual level of understanding and respect. And I'm curious, for you as a parent with a kid with a disability, what does the word inclusion mean to you, my friend?
That's a great question, and I think you have a more personal sense of this. And I want to say something right off the bat. My job is to be a dad and to bring people to perspective before I am. I will never try to be the person that Devin is or that you are, and sort of pretend that I understand what you're going through or Devin goes through. So everything I say is from my perspective, understanding what I went through with regard to her. And I know that's a hard thing to say, but I want to make sure that's very clear. I think inclusion is one of those really challenging things because the truth is, I want to believe, and this is, fantasy probably, that we can live in a world where inclusion isn't really necessary. We just, you show up, and your strengths and weaknesses are open for all to interpret. You're welcome into the classroom, you're welcome into the job, and it's based on what you can do, not with the perception of what your diagnosis says that you can do. And so inclusion means you're part of the game. And one of the things that I always tell people, is inclusion is allowing the dignity of failure. In other words, allowing people the chance to fail, knowing that they're going to succeed. And if they can't succeed, then failing is okay. And if you assume somebody can't do something based on their diagnosis or who they are without knowing them or without giving them an opportunity, then you're automatically secluding those individuals. So inclusion means, we all have the same opportunities, we all have the same chance, regardless of what you perceive that person is able to do, in the classroom. And people tend to sort of look at employment and school as this sort of these islands of, you do this here, you do this here. And what we found, and I hope that you've experienced that through your younger years, as we both get a little older, we can reflect on those things, is that there were perceptions, like for instance in the classroom, that was our biggest um, uh, thing in the face of what could happen to Devon. When we were in Michigan, there was just the expectation that she would be in the class with all of her other friends, and they had a person, a classroom aide come in to help sort of spread the load. But the expectation was that she would just be included in all the assignments and all the other things that her friends did. And when we moved to Seattle, that was not the expectation. The expectation was she got to go to a separate room where there were a lot of other kids with different abilities and disabilities, and they were kind of secluded, and they didn't get to interact with the other kids in the classroom. And that was our first big fight. And we succeeded in getting her included in the classroom, because inclusion is not just mental and ability in terms of the classroom. It's also social, and the other thing that we discovered through our journey is that when you have different abilities in the classroom and you have aides in the classroom that help, that actually helps the whole class. Like that raises the level of the whole class, and it starts with a teacher, but it also have to have those kids in the classroom. So inclusion is a really hard word for me to really get my head around, because we talk about it like it's some foreign concept that we should think about as an afterthought. When the reality is that just should be the default. People show up and you figure out who they are, once you welcome them into the classroom or in the workspace, or to the party or to the bar, wherever that happens to be. I know as humans we tend to be tribal in terms of how we perceive people, but I think inclusion is just trying to reach beyond that. That was a really rambling, long-winded answer. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, it certainly did. And I'll follow up by asking you, especially in the States now, diversity, equity, and inclusion has gone through sort of what I'm calling an extreme makeover in our perception of it and how it's viewed from a societal standpoint. So I'm curious, as a parent, what frustrates you the most, or what disappoints you the most about how we currently view diversity, equity, and inclusion? What do you want society to know that is confronted with this issue on a daily basis about the importance of diversity of thinking? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Oh gosh, that is such a great question. And I think we're just in this really crazy time when it's, on some levels it's become a bad word to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and they're taking it out of text and classrooms. And the fact is, we're humans who all look different, who all perform differently, we all have our own strengths. And as I said, the baseline, should be that. When you have, I'll tell you, for me growing up, I was a military brat, so I moved all over. I went, a lot of my younger years in school were in West Texas. And I went through high school never having met a person with an intellectual or developmental disability. What's interesting, I went to a school district where I was literally the only Caucasian person on the whole football and basketball team. But, so on that level, diversity was just part of my baseline. But on the other level, I never met anybody with an intellectual developmental disability, which you and I both know is statistically impossible. That meant those people were secluded. So my perception of diversity, equity, inclusion was very biased because I never was exposed to those people. And so part of that language has to be, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what people are like unless you've actually met them. And that's on every level. When I was in the Air Force, I was deployed to the Middle East right after 9/11. So I went over there 2 weeks after 9/11. I'm on this base with a bunch of young people who'd never been out of their hometown. And their perceptions of what Arab people were like was completely biased based on what they perceived from their CNN and where they were living. And once they got to meet people who looked differently, who they saw on the news, it was a different situation. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is the only way humanity moves forward. If we don't learn to accept who we are, regardless of how we look or how we act, we will never be happy and peaceful. And you can make all the little tribes you want, but they will always be tribes. And it was never more clear to me until I had a child with a disability that made me change my perspective. So when we have these and it's hard for me as a middle-aged Caucasian dude to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion because I grew up in a very different situation, and I recognize that now. But I also recognize through my experiences in the military, growing up, and now with a daughter with a disability, that if we don't look at the world in the way we need to, we'll never be a productive society. I don't see how that can happen. And it was never clear to me till I had Devon. And it's sad that it took me till my young adulthood to actually have that thrown in my face like that. But thank goodness it did, because now I have a perspective of what happiness really is. Happiness is different for everybody, and happiness is an internal thing. But seeing a daughter who struggles every day and is happy to struggle, she loves who she is. She is a joyful person. She's sad, she gets depressed, she's a human, but seeing how she gets joy from things that I never really thought about, makes me a better person. And that allows me to be a better person for all my family because I'm learning from her, just like my family is learning from me. And without that kind of perception, none of us can achieve, what I perceive as happiness or a better society. I know those are big words, but that's how I feel the reality of it. And I want to tell you just a real quick story.
Yeah,
I
please.
wrote these books a long time ago. Is that okay? Do we have time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I wrote these books several years ago, and through the pandemic, to be honest with you, I lost a little of my creative mojo, and I've been trying to get back into that creative part of my brain. And we can talk about that a little bit. And the thing that really pushed me in to wanting to sort of bring these messages out, because Devon's now an adult. She's got an apartment, she's got a job, she's got a fiance, like she's living her life, right? As you know, when I was working one weekend in the hospital, there was a family that was considering, terminating the life of. And this is not a talk about women's choice. I don't mean that at all, but of their child with trisomy 21, and it's hard for me to reconcile my beautiful daughter who has a happy, wonderful life with somebody not knowing those possibilities exist for their child. And so part of the reason I love talking with people like you is because I feel it's important that people know the world isn't in these little boxes. You have to sort of open the box to really find out what it's about, and you find joy in a different way when you do open that box. Sometimes it's heartache, sometimes it's pain, but you never know until you open it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And Sean, I also wanted to ask you about, being a novelist and wanting to give Devon sort of a platform so that she can see herself. Because I know that we both believe that representation matters, and I know that one of your passions for becoming an author was so that your daughter could feel included in societal life. So expand a little bit on those novels and why you think the gift of writing and art is important from an inclusion perspective, my friend. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I wrote a lot of research stuff before I started writing novels, and the impetus for me to start writing novels is, as you intimated, was Devon, and there's a lot of, like, as I said, there's a lot of medical stuff out there, a lot of textbook information about all the things that you saw and people with certain diagnoses, but there wasn't anything out there that was real world enjoyable, having sugar with your medicine, so to speak. And so the impetus for me to write these was so my first books were children's, well, really early reader chapter books that they're sort of portrayed as sort of a Nancy Drew mystery kind of thing. And the protagonist had Down syndrome. And all the things the protagonist in the books did were things Devon did in real life. Because I wanted people to see themselves in these stories. I wanted them to be approachable. Because to your point is, I don't know how any of us can, easily. I shouldn't say achieving things isn't easy. It shouldn't be easy, but you can't decide what you want to do or what you want to be if you can't see yourself in that space. And if you never see yourself in a space where you're doing things, there's no representation in your world then it's hard to see, and it's hard for the families. So my hope was families would sit down and read these books and see what Devon actually did and say, hey, my kid is capable of this, and the kid would know, hey, I'm capable of this. These are real things. Devon's stick is she is an ambassador to possibilities, and so framing it in that point of view was really important. So my impetus to do this was to sort of frame things so that people could see not only Devon in this role, but the possibilities which he was able to do as a young adult and grow up with that. My later books, I wanted to represent more than just Devon, as you know, with my graphic novel. I wanted to bring in, Devon's friends. She had a great friend with cerebral palsy. She had her fiance's got autism, and bring those characters into the light of what their different strengths were, aside from the diagnosis, and I wanted to make it attainable so people could not only see themselves in those positions, but also it's easy to read, it's easy to have fun with. You want somebody to sit down and enjoy seeing themselves in a role that was both inspiring and possible. Being an ambassador to possibilities is a huge task, and so you have to sort of keep pushing boundaries with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sean, I want to hear about Devon and what makes her so fabulous, my friend. I know that she's a fierce advocate for her independence. As you mentioned, she's engaged now and she's got a job. So tell me about Devon and what makes her so fabulous, my friend.
So Devin is, as a dad of more than one kid, you always want to make sure that you give due credit to all your family. But Devin is special because she never gives up. She is unfallibly going to do things until she accomplishes those things, and so she has a crazy memory. She doesn't forget anything, and she never gives up, and she takes ownership in that. So as you said, she's had this job working for a lab in downtown Seattle for 6 years now. She's got benefits. She's got an apartment. She just moved out this year. So my wife and I are sort of in real. She's not in the house with us, and is engaged. Is gonna hopefully be married in the next year or two. But what makes her special is just her ability to just keep going no matter what. Like that is her superpower. She is happy to keep plugging along until she gets something done. And she never is upset with, I mean, we all get upset with failure, but she is willing to fail again and again and again and again to get what she wants. And that's her superpower. Those are things that not all of us have. She's more capable in some things than a lot of other people without diagnosis. And certainly she has her challenges, but we all have our different challenges. And, I think I learned from her and her joy to do those things. And I've historically had challenges with finding joy in things sometimes. Life is hard and my job is hard. And having a daughter who always puts one foot in front of the other and is always happy to do so, allows me a little more joy in my life as well. So I would say the thing that's most special about Devon is her attitude. She just doesn't give up. And that is such a gift. And to find joy in it too. Like, some of us are against the grindstone, trying every day harder and harder, harder. And it's hard to find joy in that. And seeing somebody who is able to maintain that joy. And I want to be clear, she has bad days, she gets depressed, she gets upset. This is not like a perfect world. But by and large, she never gives up. And is happy to be who she is. I personally wish I could be as happy with who I am. I have many more struggles looking in the mirror, getting out of bed in the morning, and envisioning myself in a positive framework. Devon is so much better at that. She has little flyers that she puts all over her room with positive aspirations every day. And I personally aspire to be that person because I see the value in that.
Yeah, and Sean, I wonder your perspective on the difference between inclusion and acceptance, my friend, and whether you think those two things are correlated or if there's distinctive differences. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Oh gosh, I would say, before Devon was with us, I would say, oh, those are pretty close related. I can accept this person, for who they are, and that's pretty close to inclusion, right? And I think the reality is very different. Acceptance is having somebody in the room, having somebody cheer for you at the game. Inclusion is letting them play the game with you, inviting them to play. And so the words seem like they should be very close. But I think they're not. I think inclusion means a very open, understanding way of accepting people for who they are, but inviting them to play. Accepting somebody. We always talk about dances and the Special Olympics. I don't know if anybody's been involved with Special Olympics, but there's always a big dance at the end of Special Olympics, and it's just this crazy fun thing. And so they often talk about it in terms of that. And acceptance is, somebody being in the same room with you dancing with somebody else. Inclusion is inviting that person to dance with you. And those are just very different things. You may be in the same room, but it's not the same level. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And, Sean, from your perspective, I'm curious, when we look at societal and attitudinal barriers for individuals with disabilities, as a parent with a kid with a disability and other kids, how do you think society needs to shift their attitude when it comes to, what people with disabilities can add to society? My friend, what are your thoughts?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question. I guess that's why we're having this conversation, is because I think we want society to look at people differently than they do. And that's not to say all people don't. But that's kind of the tagline for our movement, if you will, is raise expectations. You cannot have a preconceived notion about what somebody's like or what they're capable of until you know that person. And so I think at the very baseline of all of our discussions, it has to be that acceptance that, our understanding of disability is flawed. Some people are capable of things that we don't understand. I took care of a patient a few weeks ago who had Angelman syndrome, and he came in. Unfortunately, his parents had passed, and there was nobody really who knew this individual. And so his caretakers just assumed this individual was non-communicative, not non-verbal, but non-communicative. And it became clear through our care of him over the course of a week that this individual was able to communicate. It's just that people around him didn't know how he communicated and didn't have an understanding of who he was. And so the course of the week, it became clear that our perceptions of what this individual was capable of were flawed. And if we enter in the situation thinking this person is we don't know what they're capable of, let's find out, versus diagnosis, here's where they are, and just take that as your baseline, then you will never ever know what that person's capable of. And this lesson is shown to me again and again. And I have a different perspective now because of Devon, and I probably went into that situation with a more open mind because of that. But those kind of moments are really important. So I think, to your point, is we have to sort of, as a society, stop thinking about people in boxes. Once again, we are such tribal beings that the only way we're going to get out of that is if we're exposed to each other. If you're able to actually work, play, or meet somebody who looks different than you, who behaves different than you, who has a different diagnosis, you will never really fully embrace that. You just can't get that from watching the news. You just can't. And you can watch as many Special Olympics things on TV that you want, but unless you're actually interacting with people and accepting of them, there we go again, accepting, you'll never really fully appreciate that. And I want to believe it would be different, that we can just open our minds without those direct exposures. But I think those direct exposures are important. Meeting somebody like you is very important. You and I are having a moment of discussion and understanding between two humans, and we just need more of that so that people are more open-minded. And society will function better. The studies looking at employment and having people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the workforce are dramatic. The job turnover rate, the job production rate, they're all better when you include people who are different into the workplace, regardless of what you believe. That's been shown time and time again. Yet, trying to get a support employment program for someone with a disability is still such a challenge. Even though it's a great business choice, people's perceptions of what that actually means is so jaded that they're not open to that. And so that's partly why you and I are having this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that leads into my next question. I wanted your perspective on if people haven't been exposed to the disability community, but they're sort of inspired to lend a helping hand in sort of breaking down those barriers. I'm curious, when we talk about disparities, what do you think everyday people can do to help bridge the gap of understanding?
I think human relationships are the best way to sort of reach out. And I think they're the easiest way, and this is just me, the easiest way to explore understanding people is to do a volunteer work. And this doesn't have to be like every week for a year, but volunteer for Special Olympics track meet. The ARC of almost every county has an ARC, an ARC, that is responsible for some of the disability community. There are there's tons of nonprofits for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Special Olympics is probably the best known one. And just volunteering to help give water at a track meet or a basketball game, or just having some direct interaction, just allows you to sort of see what it's all about. And once you actually meet people and see people, then you can know if that's the right thing for you. Is so for people who aren't sure what they want to do, who feel like they're not in touch necessarily with different parts of our humanity and our communities, then doing some volunteer work, I think, is probably, having those direct interactions with different humans is important to our ability to perceive them in a different light. Unless we're, you can, there's been a few examples of people in mainstream media that have been represented with different intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that's wonderful. And I think that has to happen on multiple levels. But for us to really sort of grow, we have to have those personal relations. And they don't have to be, once again, it doesn't have to be every night or every week, but just look at your community and find something that's reasonable. Our website, we have a little thing that talks about some of those different communities, and it's different for autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy. There's multiple communities. The only reason I mention Special Olympics is because that's the one most people know about. But there's also an organization called Best Buddies, where it's just about friendship, and friendships with people who have different abilities across the spectrum. But just having one meet, just to see what it's all about, I think can change people's perspective of what it means. And I know it's changed me, and I hope for the better. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and Sean, I wanted to go back to you being an author for just a second because, I think that we've lost the imagination of reading, and I know it's a sense of connection for you for your daughter, as we talked about earlier. But talk to me about the importance of getting lost in the imagination of reading and how important do you think that is to form a sense of connection, my friend?
That's such a great question. It's funny. When I started this journey, one of the biggest hurdles for me was just my belief in myself. Writing these books, would they be worth it? Would anybody care? That all those self-doubt things that happen. And my original impetus just to push through was, I needed to let everybody know how amazing Devon was. Like that was the whole point of it. But what's interesting is over the years that's changed to the point where I need to use that creative part of my brain to exist as a human. Like there's the scientific, the logical side of my brain, but I found out like my brain works better. I'm a better human when I also exercise that creative part. So this advocacy for Devon became something that was crucial to my well-being in a way that I didn't really fully perceive. So being able to create worlds and visions where people, look and act differently. The greatest gift for me personally is if somebody is able to sort of read or look at something that I've created and be able to see themselves in a different light. If they put down that book and it moves them in a way that they have to think about it for a while, that's that's money for me. I will never forget. I was able to go to before the pandemic to a Comic Con there in Portland.
Mhm.
It was fantastic. But I had a couple moms who had children with autism, and they picked up my graphic novel and with their child, and were able to see themselves in a different way, and this sort of superhero world that I created that just made them cry, and I will never forget that. Because one thing I've learned through Devon, and I should have, I say that like it's a crutch. I shouldn't have needed a daughter with a disability to become a better human, but that's the literal aspect of what's happened. But when I was younger, I talked about being a surgeon. You have these big visions of how you're going to change the world and that stuff. And what I found is every day affecting somebody positively. So if you leave every interaction you have during that day, and that individual that you've interacted with feels better for having that interaction, that's powerful. Every little moment, everybody who reads a book, everybody who I say hi to in the hallway, every person in the surgery room that I say hi to and I treat them with respect and know that they're worth something. Those are the things that build over time. Yes, we want to have a big impact, but I also have been able to focus much more on those little moments, those interactions, because I want everybody to have, when I see them in the world today, and but at the end of the day, I have a much greater appreciation of how much these one-on-one interactions impact people throughout their day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, I know that you mentioned you were in the Air Force, my friend, and knowing that discipline in the military and discipline raising kids, especially one with a disability, are drastically different. But I'm wondering if some part of your Air Force training has made you a better parent in terms of discipline and understanding and a sense of camaraderie, my friend. What are your thoughts there?
That's a great question. My wife and I would laugh about this one because I growing up as a military brat, my grandfather was a World War II vet. My dad was a Vietnam vet. So we moved all over the world with the Army. And so I kind of had this framework of, following orders, and this is how you grew up and this is how you did things. And so with our first child, that's kind of, I thought, that's how you were a parent. You told your kids what to do and you had boundaries and rules and blah, blah, blah. And guess what? That doesn't really work very well. So I always feel bad that our first child was an experiment. Fortunately, we learned very quickly. So we learned that, being in the military was not like being a parent. But I do think the things that the military has taught me over the years is just, which fits with my personality, is just consistency. When you get up out of bed, you have a job to do. It's less about following the direct orders and owing to it. It's more about personal structure and pushing through no matter what. And so the military has just helped me with the framework of how I organize my life and being consistent. The other thing the military taught me, full disclosure, is I didn't like being away from my family. You know, my lovely wife was pregnant with one of our children when I was deployed after 9/11, and those were some of the hardest times of my life. We all have separation from loved ones and family, but the military taught me the importance of family. It taught me the importance of teamwork, and being consistent. I'm very grateful for my time in the military, but I'm also understanding of the things I need to do as a parent. Um, but yeah, I think it was really consistency and timing. And I'm mumbling a little bit just because that's a really hard question because I see those worlds so differently. But to your point is, I couldn't have one without the other. And so one thing I learned in the military was I had to be on base at a certain time. And so if I wanted to get stuff done and be there for my family, I had to organize my life differently. So I had to prioritize things. So it really helped with that as well.
And Sean, I'm going to combine my last two questions because they're interconnected. I'm
Yeah.
curious, my friend, for you, what's the best part about being a dad, and how do you think being the best dad that you can be will contribute to your legacy, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
That's a great question. I think my vision of being a great dad is that my kids are good people. And I will tell you, my kids are good people. I think, my wife Susan, and I have made the world a better place because our kids are great people. Handing the legacy of our world to good people is important. Not the jobs they hold. I mean, we all have what we give to society, but at the end of the day, they're good people. And that's the one thing that I think is more important than anything as a parent, because none of us is perfect. As a parent, I was never, you never know exactly the right thing to do or the right thing to say, but we always allowed our kids to be what they want. And our fundamental tactic, if you will. I guess that's probably not the right word. Was just allowing our kids to achieve what they were able to do. And the word we say is the dignity of failure. We allowed our kids to do what they wanted to do, knowing that if they failed, they would have a soft landing spot. We never said for any of our children, you can't do that. You won't be able to achieve that on any level. And so I think the role of the parent is to give your kids the possibilities, allow them to explore the world, and knowing that they're going to be safe if they fail, the dignity of failure, the dignity of experimentation. So I think success as a parent to me is having children that are good people. And part of that is allowing your kids to fail and finding their own path. None of my kids are going into medicine. I'm the first doctor in my family ever, and none of my kids are going into medicine. But they're making their mark in their own way, and I'm so thankful for it. And when your kids are little, you're doing fun things, going to soccer and doing stuff like that. I was a coach to my kids throughout their youth sports. But now, last week I went to a concert with my two of my kids. We went out to a bar and had drinks and went to a concert. Like, dude, that was beautiful. Like, that was so fun. My kids want to hang out with me. My adult children want to hang out with me. Like, what the heck? That's just I get all weepy just thinking about that. Like, to me, that's success as a parent. My kids are good people and they actually want to hang out with me. Like, what more could you ever ask for?
Well, considering that there isn't a modern handbook to parenting, you should give yourself a collective pat on the back, okay?
Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. And, Sean, I want to know if people want to get connected with you. What's the best way they can do that, my friend?
Honestly, our website is probably the best way because it also has the resources, for people who want to engage in the community and find those things. They can email us to our website. It's raisedexpectations.com. That's our mantra. Raise expectations. They gave me a failure. And that's probably the best way for people to engage with us personally. And that's got our Facebook I'm full disclosure. I'm like the worst social media marketer person in the world. I love talking with people. I love having this conversation with you. I answer every single email that comes through. I'm really good at that stuff, but posting on Facebook is not my strong suit. So I'm working on it though. I'm a work in progress.
Well, we can say that about every aspect of life, my friend. But I really enjoyed this conversation. I want to applaud the work that you've done to build bridges of both inclusion, acceptance, and understanding, my friend. I really was delighted to have this conversation with you, and I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Thank you, Kevin. It's lovely talking with you. I'm so thankful that you're doing this.